one of the reasons I was personally attracted by this initiative when I first spoke about it to Philippe Marais was that he really had established 25 years ago a very successful program, Collège des Ingénieurs, which so far has educated 1,500 talented individuals, had extended it in Germany, here in Munich, and wanted it to grow to become a European institution. And so I felt that if we could be part of this, helping work an Italian entity, which is SCIFM, and be part of a larger European context, that would be something I would very much like to be associated with. And what has happened since in Europe has been interesting and has fundamentally tested also the belief one has in what the future of Europe is. And one of the merits of what you were doing at the Collège des Ingénieurs and its different branches in France and Germany and in Italy, and also the interactions all of you have together, is really what I felt was interesting to be able to build Europe. So I associate my life very much with Europe, and I'm a strong believer of Europe. I wanted to share with you a quote which I think is very significant to define what I've tried to describe. Jean Monnet, who is one of the founding fathers of the European community, said, "Europe will be forged in crisis and will be the sum of the solutions adopted for those crises." And this quote is very interesting because what it says, and he said it when the reason for wanting a Europe were much stronger than today, he knew that it would have been then very difficult in achieving this. And if I look at my personal experience and what I've been living in my professional life in the last decade, I've gone through many, many crises. I've started with internal crisis where our business was going bankrupt and we were able, for luck and for many different things, to be able to turn that around. When finally things had turned around, we got in the 2008 crisis where everything collapsed. And then again, we had to see how we could reinvent ourselves. We were fortunate to be able to engage with Chrysler and be able to be part of what was the turnaround of Chrysler, which made our organization much stronger on the exit of that crisis. And when things finally were stabilizing, 2011 came and put everything back in crisis mode, with the European market at its lowest in terms of car sales, and Italy, just as an example, is going to sell less cars in 2012 than in 1985, which fundamentally will require on our end to try and rethink very carefully what we can, and especially how we can work forward. I also, spending a lot of time in the United States and being born in the United States and being very interested in the United States, I felt that I wanted to share with you something which I learned recently. When the United States was formed, the first Secretary of Treasury was someone called Alexander Hamilton. And at that point, the United States were many different states, and they had gone through a revolution, and George Washington was the first president. But they weren't really very linked, and they didn't really share the same values. Some states had slaves, other states did not have slaves. They didn't have the same economies, so it wasn't really homogeneous. And one of the ways they were able to pull it together was because the big debt that the different states had incurred during the revolution had to be paid. And that debt was very big. That debt was primarily versus other countries outside of the United States and to the Americans, of which most of those Americans were soldiers who had fought during the revolution. And what Hamilton proposed was basically to take away the debt from the single states and take it at a higher level, which was the federal level, and basically address the issue of debt at that level. One, by paying back what was owed to the countries outside, and then trying to reformulate a debt structure by creating a new facility. And what I found interesting in this were two things. One is that his definition of debt, and he thought that a reasonably sized public debt was something which made sense for a country because that was the powerful cement of our union. And the second interesting fact is that the big opponents to the plan that Hamilton had in mind were Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, which was Secretary of State, and Madison, who was head of the Representatives. And they felt that it wasn't fair to do that because they came from Virginia, and Virginia was a virtuous state, which basically owed no money. So why would they have to pay for the other states? So that was the big reason why they were against this. And finally, on June 20, 1979, they had a famous dinner which was called the Dinner Table Compromise, in which they agreed that this would happen and that the capital of the United States would be transferred from New York, where it was, to Washington, D.C., which was in Virginia. And so they agreed, and basically this was one of the big strengths of the foundation of what then became the United States of America. Now, having said all of this, what really is important and what really I want to share with you about Europe and about the future of the European Union is that at the end of the day, Europe will need to be competitive. And most of you and what you're doing and what your future will be will very much be part of that. So that is why an initiative like this one and what you're doing today is very important for the future, because whatever role Europe has with the other participants of the world that there are and the different countries who are developing will be a strong role and a position of being able to interact with new countries like China, like India, like Brazil, if Europe invents its future, and if Europe is able to be competitive, and if Europe has strength in itself, which fundamentally is not about speaking of the past, but about finding new ways of building the future. And I have a quote I want to leave to you before I answer any questions you have, which is from Keynes. And he says, the difficulty lies not in the new ideas, but in escaping the old ones. And this is very much what, as Europeans, we have to avoid. Difficult question with many answers. Well, I mean, first of all, I think each of us being different, the important thing is to have a good understanding of who you are, and then to try and play to your strength rather to your weakness. And that is a continuous learning experience which you need to engage with yourself. As most of you will be working with other people, I think that interpersonal skills are very important, and so the way you improve that. And I think, and I would encourage to be open on feedback loops and working in environments where you can actually have people helping you to develop, so not taking criticism as something negative, but as an opportunity to improve. So that would be my second recommendation. And third is adaptability. Ultimately, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. I was reading a quote, which I don't remember now, which basically was saying that the only way of predicting the future is by predicting the past, in the sense that only what has happened you're able to know. And whatever assumption we make on the future is very unlikely. So the strength of organization of individuals fundamentally lie on your adaptability to events.